Hello and welcome. This is Puneeth Suraana, and you are listening to Galata Podcast. This is my fourth episode in a new solo episode series where I am trying to find the best founders in the history of India and bringing their stories with you. Think of it this way: I'm going to be reading an autobiography and then coming to you and telling you, hey, this is what I learned, these are my highlights, this is what I've understood, and this is the new perspective I've gained. Well, it's an effort to celebrate the founders that have built this country in the past. And in this episode, I am going to be talking to you about Meena Bindra. She has built Biba to what it is today. And I just love this gripping anecdote where I want to start this episode with. People often ask me, how did you manage it? I started at the age of 40 with 4,000 rupees to spend on my work. I feel it was simple and uncluttered. I wanted to earn a little extra money and start something small from home. Money was the main motivation, and having fun would be the natural consequence if it succeeded. As I progressed with my idea and my business, I realized that in life, aspirations and goals kept changing and they kept growing larger. I was perhaps at the right place and right time to start something with apparels. Oh, she was. We'll get to that in the story. It was a new trend and there was not much competition. I also happened to be in Mumbai, the right city that gave enough opportunity for growth and might have been the best place to start something new. If I were to pick three factors that helped in my journey, they would be hard work, single-minded focus, and luck. The first two qualities are the most important pillars for any enterprise to succeed and are the basic requirement for success in any sphere of life. Admittedly, I cannot discount the third factor as it has always played a very important role in one's life. It is the invisible force that at times makes things happen by chance and works in mysterious ways. We'll get to that in our story as well. There were moments when I felt there was an invisible force propelling me in the right direction, following which things kept falling in place effortlessly. With hard work and consistency, you get what you work for. Many of the people I met by chance were generous with their help and advice, connecting me with professionals in my field, and that helped me to keep working. A woman's responsibilities never end. She is expected to do full justice to her role as a wife, a mother, and a homemaker. I, as a wife, had to fulfill all the social obligations that came with it. Women have to multitask a lot, and we also accept it as part of our life. The social conditioning is so strong in us that we feel we are fully responsible to run the house, take care of the children, and manage relationships with the extended family and relatives. A man's responsibilities, on the other hand, ends at fulfilling his career requirements. I was told by many friends and family members that I was lucky that my husband allowed me to stay in Mumbai to continue with my work. They never stressed on my sacrifices, on all the hard work I put in to build a business and improve the family finances, besides taking care of my two sons. It was considered an indulgence by a woman to want to step out of the norm, especially for her career. When my husband was chairman of Hindustan Shipyard at Visakhapatnam for 5 years, as his wife, I had to be there for all the social obligations, like the launch of a new ship, which was a big moment for a shipbuilding company. A ship's launch day is important and celebrated in the presence of a VIP who is invited to launch the ship. Once the President of India came to launch a particular ship and my presence was required for the ceremony. As we were the hosts, I was constantly juggling between the roles of a wife, mother, and businesswoman, giving first preference to my duties as a wife. Very few men would have felt the need or compulsion to do such a thing for their wife's career in those days. My husband's personal assistant and the other personal staff could never comprehend what could be more important for me than being the chairman's wife. It certainly couldn't be as important as running a business in Mumbai. They would ask me very diplomatically why I couldn't just close my business, be in Visakhapatnam full time, and enjoy the perks of being the chairman's wife. A little ahead, she says, and something I've highlighted, I'm glad things have changed a lot, and working women are now getting the required support and admiration from their families and society. But it is still not enough, and we have a long way to go. I agree. It is imperative for a woman to carve out some space or find an activity that she is good at. It empowers her and contributes to her self esteem. I have been lucky to have had help from some unexpected quarters, from my business associates, my vendors at times who would always go the extra mile for me, from my husband whose main contribution, hear this out, from my husband whose main contribution was that he stayed out of my work and didn't interfere or offer advice. I am an ordinary woman who embarked on an extraordinary journey in midlife. I hope my story will encourage other women and give them the courage to venture into unknown terrain with more confidence. My story is not about being clever or successful. It is simply about wanting to share my journey so that women are not afraid of prejudices and failure. Women should give each other space and not let our bias and assumptions divide us. We should be inclusive and embrace our similarities. I wrote this book because I realized there was great power in allowing your voice to be heard and life to be known. As it might give courage to others, for me, it is not about arriving somewhere or achieving a certain milestone, but an onward journey, a means of evolving and constantly trying to become a better version of myself. I hope to remain a lifelong student. I wish my mother was alive to see that I've achieved some success in life. I should have been more generous with myself and indulged myself more with time and money. I wish I had spent more time with some of the incredible people I met. I do have a vision. I do have a vision for Biba and its many employees, their future, well-being and growth. I would like Biba to become a big Indian global brand. I hope my life will remain a work in progress. And that's at the prologue of this book. I want to jump to the leaf of the book, which quickly summarizes Meena's entire journey. Intro version 2, if the first version doesn't work. Meena Bindra's journey from early childhood in Delhi in a business family to her life as a naval wife from the armed forces and thereafter her moving towards being an entrepreneur are all captured here very simply and captivatingly. The story is an interesting peek into how from such a humble start from home, at a time when women in business was not the norm, she managed to carve out a place for herself in the fashion industry. A Stitch in Time is the story of a woman who was able to overcome her challenges when all odds were against her. Through sheer perseverance and grit, alongside it captures the story of the Indian fashion industry from its inception to the phenomenal growth as we see it today, through challenges, opportunities, and much excitement. She was also a part of the beginning and growth of the organized retail industry and became an integral part thereafter. The book captures her long journey as an entrepreneur and the changing times of the fashion and organized retail industry in India through 4 decades with its trials, tribulations, challenges, and success. So, without further ado, let's dive into the book. I find her journey extremely inspiring. And it all starts off in New Delhi. One of 6 siblings, I grew up in a happy household with 2 elder sisters and 3 younger brothers. Our father, whom we called Bauji, was very indulgent but also a strict disciplinarian. But growing up, Meena was not the one to toe the line. She was always a rebel child, and despite her dad being so strict, she was sent off to a boarding school. Hear this out. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I was sent to a convent boarding school in Mussoorie called Hampton Court, along with my sister Indu, who was 4 years older than me. My parents felt that we would become more disciplined and get used to a strict routine there, which they were somehow unable to enforce at home. My highlight is really, how is that possible? Also, they felt we would learn to speak English well, which was a coveted accomplishment in those days. We're still talking about 1940s here, where English was really a highly coveted skill to have, spoken English. I have vague and not very happy memories of my stay at the boarding school. The nuns were quite unrelenting in their attempts to discipline us and impact strict moral teachings with a stern face, and they seldom smiled. We would be given a few smacks on our bottoms with a bristle hairbrush as we stood facing the wall for any perceived misdemeanor or breaking any rules. I was a regular recipient of this corrective measure. The one thing that I took The one thing that I look forward to was getting a tuck, which was snacks sent from home in the evening, and I used to enjoy sitting on the stairs of her boarding school outside and slowly relishing it. She's such a rebel. She liked getting whacked by a cane. There's this quote that I keep getting back to when I read the formative years of founders. If you want to study a founder, study like delinquent children is a famous quote, and I feel that these are the rebellious attitudes that you will see across a lot of founders. Here's how our house was back in the day. We lived in a large 3-storied grey house on Rani Jhansi Road in Delhi. Our house had a big garden and we had a fairly luxurious life. Bauji was fond of lavish living and horse racing was one of his indulgences. He owned a couple of horses at one point of time and traveled across the country to attend races, much to my mother and grandfather's disapproval. In Delhi, I remember he would bundle us into the car on Sundays and take us to the race course. It used to be the highlight of the week. We carried white sugar cubes to feed the horses and found it exciting to see how quickly they lapped those up. I remember Amma admonishing him for indulging in this sport. In those days, it was seen akin to gambling, which in turn was considered a vice. She was constantly asking him to refrain from the sport. Now, here's a bit more about Bauji and their living circumstances in the early years. Bauji was a big contractor who received many government construction projects and was considered wealthy by the standards of the time. He was also an exceptionally good judge of character. We realized this much later. When Dr. Zakir Hussain became the President of India in 1967, at that point, Amma told us how Bauji had been one of the key people connected with the construction of the highly reputed Jamia Millia Islamia, sorry, I really messed that up. Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi in 1935. In this connection, we had interacted with Dr. Zakir Hussain, one of its founders, who had been the Vice Chancellor of the Institute. Amma remembered Bauji telling her how Dr. Zakir Hussain was the most charismatic gentleman she had met. Oh, she had met a lot of them. Bauji told Amma that he felt sure Dr. Hussain would go far in life, and his words came true when he became the President of India. In her own quiet way, Amma was proud that Bauji had predicted Dr. Hussain's successful trajectory in life. Now, all things come shattering soon when Bauji passes away. But before that, a little bit more about her leadership in her formative years. Some leaders are definitely born, and Meena Bindra seemed like one. Hear this out. We kept ourselves occupied by playing and innovating simple games like Pittu and Kabaddi. I don't know what Pittu is. If you know, please put it in the comments. Which have now resurfaced as professional sports in India. Hopscotch and blind man's buff, where one blindfolded child has to catch others within a limited specified space. I've played these too. I also had the dubious distinction of being the Gilli Danda champion of the Mohalla. I was very good at organizing group games. I had a troop of 4 girls a little younger than me. They formed my core group and followed me around, took instructions from me and addressed me respectfully as Meena Didi, much to the amusement of my 2 older sisters. We would play by the rules I arbitrarily set for the games that I was constantly organizing, and no one dared disobey me for fear of being thrown out of the group. Nothing can be worse for a kid of 7 or 8 than to be alone and friendless. Look at her leadership skills already. I can't tell you how these very skills have kept her in such strong stead across her entire journey when she organizes some really first-time things for a fashion brand in India. We'll come to that. Keep listening. Life was carefree and exciting, but it took a tragic turn when my father suddenly passed away after suffering a massive heart attack on his morning walk. Even though I was just 11 at the time, I still remember the terrifying emotions. My father was 43 and my mother was younger by 3 years. She was left with 6 children, the youngest being 3 years old and the oldest being 15. It was a shock to all of us, and it took us an awfully long time to piece our lives back together. Fortunately, we had a steady rental income from the properties my father had invested in. We became cautious, however, not to cause any trouble for my mother or to make frivolous demands. We were very conscious of our changed circumstances, and that led us to become mature and undemanding. We greatly missed the security, care, and indulgence that only a father could provide in one's life. We faced this big vacuum in our lives with some struggle, and each of us dealt with our own insecurities, feeling that in many ways we had to fend for ourselves. Growing without one's father does leave a permanent scar in one's life and a feeling of helplessness at times. I I think she's gone through a lot, more than her mother at this point of time. And it's fascinating how her mother saved most of the properties of her father, including the big house, when she was pushed to sell it by her in-laws. Shows the spine her mother had despite all the circumstances she was in. And she's one thing that she really drilled in to all the 6 kids was simple living and high thinking, which was her favorite quote, her mother's favorite quote all the time. A highlight further that I have put and marked is, 2 traits have stood me in good stead all my life. I was not shy of taking on responsibilities, and I made friends easily. One can see how this first one has come about after losing her father. She did take up a lot of responsibilities, became undemanding in the family, and she was already having a leadership streak. And making friends easily is something we'll see throughout the book and throughout her career, which comes naturally and effortlessly to her. There's another bit that connects sports to entrepreneurship very early on, and I think that's why if you have kids, you should enroll them into team sports as early as possible, because it just builds in all the traits that a founder requires. Hear this out. I did not make the connection at the time, but doing well in sports made me more self-assured and shaped my future in many ways. Sports build character and teach one to develop strategic and analytical thinking. They inculcate traits like leadership skills, resilience, and team building. They also teach one to set goals and improve one's risk-taking abilities. They show one the right balance to deal with success and failure. Besides being good for one's physical fitness, I am glad that I took a keen interest in sports while growing up. It probably helped shape my personality more than I realized. Perhaps girls in our country should be encouraged more to take up sports. I can't agree more. I did an entire 10-episode series on sportswomen on Galata. I'll link it up in the description. Go give it a listen, and you'll realize how amazing sports can shape women. Her time in college was pretty freewheeling. She chilled out a lot than was required. She had 3 options to choose. She couldn't go too far away from her house because she wanted to live with the family and support her mother. And so the best one she chose was Miranda House. And here's why. Miranda House was my first choice, as the girls from Miranda House were supposed to be modern, smart, and articulate. I thought it would be a perfect fit for me. She's pretty much cruised around while in her college, and one of her favorite quotes back then was by this author called Cassandra Clare. As long as there was coffee in the world, how wrong could things be? I thought that was a nice quote. Something I could use in my table topics at the Toastmasters Club. During her college, she was deeply inclined in fashion, like most of the girls are during college. She found another friend. She was really good at making friends. She made a friend of this girl called Pummy, and she had her own group of 4 girls as well. And all these 4 girls would discuss would pretty much be boys, movies, and of course, clothes. Lots of it. The fashion at that time was to wear tight, figure-hugging tunics without any side slits. They were quite uncomfortable, and yet all of us wore them. I could barely climb into the bus in them, and I have no idea why we suffered that trend. This idea of suffering trends and why is something that keeps her intrigued trend after trend. She mentions it multiple times across the book. And I think this is, hear this out. Our clothes were stitched at home by a tailor. He sat in the veranda for a whole month with a durry spread out and his machine. Our clothes were designed by my older sister Indu, who was the family stylist. There was no fashion industry or fashion magazine to speak of in the 50s and 60s. And we mainly took our cues from Hindi films or movie magazines. Our hairstyles too were quite inspired from what we saw in the film. So you can see the early times of 40s and 50s and 60s There's a lot of interesting trivia in this book, which I cannot get into. If you like to get into the details of it, I will leave the link back in the description. Please do go and buy it from the Amazon affiliate link. It's a way to support the podcast for no additional cost of you. I'll get like some 70 paise per book you buy. Here's a story about how she met the love of her life, or the love to be of her life. During a time in Miranda House, she had a friend who had another friend who was an ADC, somebody responsible for the safety of the President of India. And so she got a walk around of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. It turned out this gentleman was interested in her, so he kept finding excuses to meet her again and again. And one thing led to another, and in came a proposal in time, and that's how she was married to an army guy, Satish Bindra. And this was also not easy for her because she had to fight to get married to him. Multiple reasons, one of them being Satish was 10 years elder to her, and the other being that her mother didn't really like the idea of being an ambassador's wife. But then she prevailed and got married to Satish. There's a nice quote which made me laugh. When you feel that you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. So her marriage happened like Jhat Mangni Pat Byah, and they were off to their next adventure, which was in Moscow, where Satish was stationed. Now, there are just two interesting stories about Moscow that I want to share with you. One is definitely about the naval tradition back in the day. As the naval tradition followed all over the world, a ship is mostly commissioned by a woman. This made me laugh. A ship is also referred to as a she. One of my favorite jokes that I remember as to why a ship is a she goes thus. She is expensive to maintain, needs a lot of paint, and is always surrounded by a lot of men. Well, I was also told that after the commissioning, I had officially became the mother of the ship. When the ship was decommissioned much later, I got a little note from the Navy informing me of the event. It was a sweet gesture, and I later learned that the submarine was converted into a small naval museum at Visakhapatnam. It's a very cute little gesture done by the naval forces. I found it really interesting and funny. Now, there's another reason why I think Moscow is interesting. It's because of this neighbor who lived above Meena Bindra and Satish Bindra's flat. Her name was Maria, and she did something called as coffee reading. Hear this out, okay? I cannot think of Moscow without remembering Maria, my Bulgarian friend and neighbor and a self-proclaimed coffee cup reader. She lived on the floor above mine, and I started visiting her almost daily. We would finish our respective morning chores and have coffee at her apartment. With her broken English and my broken Russian, we had long conversations over a cup of coffee, over a cup of Turkish coffee, and she would read the future in the patterns that emerged in the sediment. So she would look at the cup, whatever was left, the beans and the sediment, and she would predict the future. And a lot of times she predicted pretty accurately. A quick story here was her prediction of them not going back to India when they had already shipped all of their luggage. Hear this out. And there's another prediction that I found really hilarious. When we were transferred back to India and all our belongings were packed and sent, she told me that we would not be leaving Moscow as planned and there would be a delay. It was most unlikely as the date had been fixed and all our farewell parties were coming to an end. But suddenly, the Defense Minister of India decided to visit Moscow for some talks, and the naval attaché did not want a new person in office for the minister's visit. So we hung on for 3 months with most of our baggage gone. Needless to say, Maria looked very smug and I was duly impressed. Here's another prediction that Maria makes. Here's actually 2 more predictions that Maria makes, which is very, very, very life-defining for Meena. Because at this time, she had no idea what was in store for her back in India. Hear this out. 2 of her predictions that seemed most improbable at the time did turn out to be true. The first was that I would have another child after I returned to India. This was unthinkable for me as Sanjay, her first kid. Sanjay was almost 7 at the time and we were happy with that. The second prediction, even more far-fetched, was that I would have a lot of money in the years to come. I asked her if my husband would leave the Navy and start some business. To me, that was the only way I could imagine having money. But she categorically told me he would not leave the Navy. I laughed off her prediction as fanciful or wishful forecasting for a friend. I never believed for a minute that this prediction would come true. Today, I have much more money than I could have imagined, and I can't help thinking of how Maria saw it all in a cup of coffee. Now, from Moscow, they moved back to Visakhapatnam. Here's a quick, and this is where things change for her in terms of her confidence in business. But before that, a quick description of Visakhapatnam. A small and laid-back city, but a large naval base, home to the Eastern Naval Command. And my husband was posted on INS Vikrant, the only aircraft carrier of the Indian Navy at that time, which played a significant role in the 1971 war. Now, because Visakhapatnam was a very laid-back, quiet city, not even a city, probably a... Now, of course, I just call Visakhapatnam a city, not knowing what it is. Because Visakhapatnam was a very quiet, laid-back town that they were stationed in, there was not much to do. And she and another friend of hers, another Navy wife, like they would call each other, felt restless. And this is where they came up with an idea. So they went to Delhi, two nascent entrepreneurs, and with our limited funds bought Georgette saris, stylish chappals, and smart t-shirts, and lots of other fashion accessories from Janpat. And they set up a stall. Finally, the day dawned. We had decided to hold the exhibition at Asha's house. Asha was her Navy wife that I was telling you. We had barely hung everything up and finished adding the last touches when it was 10:30 a.m. and time to open our doors. Imagine our joy when we saw almost 30-40 women queued up outside, waiting impatiently. We were sold out by 5 p.m. itself. We had done better than we expected. Not only did we sell our entire stock, we also made a profit of 8,000 rupees each. That was a lot of money in 1971, and more so because we had earned it in a single day. Of course, it's another matter that it took us hardly any time at all to spend it. We would often talk about some other business plans whenever our paths crossed. Asha remained my closest friend till she passed away some years ago. She left a huge vacuum in my life, and I still miss her. This is her first profit, and this gave her confidence, which she will rely on later on in starting Biba. With the second child in, both of the kids being sent off to Mayo school in Ajmer, they were short of funds. And you realize the financial situation, despite being in Navy, being in a higher position, it wasn't enough to meet the ends. I particularly remember that once, to be able to pay the school fee, I had to sell our new AC that we had brought from Moscow. Next year, I had to sell off a new washing machine to pay the school fees. The fees had to be paid on a half-yearly basis, and in spite of our best efforts, we fell short of the required amount at times, and I would have to agree to sell household items. To me, a good education was non-negotiable, and I was willing to make any sacrifice for it. I did not mind making these small sacrifices, as I felt that a good education for my son was important. Now, this is where she was looking for ideas to make an extra buck. And like I told you, her confidence in the first stall comes back. My success with the exhibition in Visakhapatnam had given me confidence and the desire to replicate my small success in a more planned manner on a long-term basis, since this kind of work didn't require too much capital or infrastructure and could be done on a very small scale from the house. Here's where she notices a gap and goes to the bank, borrows the money, and gets working. Dream and action. That's the chapter name. I noticed that there was a lacuna. Lacuna means gap. I noticed that there was a lacuna in women's daily wear wardrobes, and the salwar kameez worn mainly by women in Punjab could fill that gap. I thought I could design printed cotton suits for women and sell them from home. But for that, I needed capital to start my business, as I did not have any money and we didn't have any savings either. I did not even have a bank account. I discussed this idea with Satish, who looked very skeptical and was non-committal about my new venture, almost dismissing it in his mind as a waste of time and as one of my fanciful ideas. I was therefore very surprised when a couple of weeks later he informed me that my loan of rupees 8,000, which he had applied for, had been sanctioned by Syndicate Bank, and I could use this money for my business if I wanted to. I was quite thrilled that at least he took the trouble to apply for a loan and succeed in getting it. However, Satish cautioned me that the loan had to be paid back to the bank with interest and that I should be very careful with the money as I would have to pay it back. Then he left me with unasked for husbandly advice. Now you will finally realize how difficult it is to earn money. I desperately wanted to prove him wrong, and prove him wrong she did. She took the 4,000 rupees, kept it aside as a backup, as a buffer, and with the 4,000 rupees, she started exploring the Bombay market. And this is where, through a friend, she got introduced to another friend who was having this factory of block printing, where she started spending more and more time, and she was fascinated by the entire idea and concept of block printing and the unimaginable, infinite possibilities of just how you could do things with block printing. And that led to an interesting discovery, where I like the word she was used. She didn't say trial and error, she said trial and test period. Because this is where she was trying out different blocks which this friend of hers had in a plenty in the factory, and seeing how they work with different fabrics. This was probably her first MVP. And she made a few clothes with this block printing that she had just picked up. She got a hall which her brother had empty in one of his homes in Bombay, and she put up her first stall, her first exhibition on her own. And despite where one is in their founder's journey, there's always self-doubt. That is exactly what I've written. This is so common. Hear this out. Once again, I feared no one would show up. Was Visakhapatnam just a first-timer's luck? Would this one be a fiasco? I was happy that at least I would not have to pay money for hiring a small space. So this exhibition of hers, which she did by herself, turned out to be a complete sellout. She managed to make the word spread, she got people in the door, and the women liked the practicality of the dresses she was managed to have. As it turned out, my 4,000 rupees became, this is at the end of the day, as it turned out, my 4,000 rupees became 7,000 rupees that day, and I invested that money into buying more fabric and made more suits to cater to the fresh orders. So she made suits, sold them out, got 7,000 rupees, after a 4,000 rupee investment, and got to making it again and again. Now there's one challenging aspect. Though she had done this block printing on the suits, found a lacuna in the market, some of them started bleeding. The ink started bleeding out. And here's an interesting lesson she learned. There's an invaluable, important design lesson I learned from this episode. I started washing all the dark piping fabrics by soaking them in soap and water overnight to drain off the excess, and then used them for piping or to trim over lighter colored garments. Again, try and test, try and test. That's exactly what she's taking the feedback from the market, implementing it in her next collection, and this is something she keeps on rolling. This cycle continued, and I kept in reinvesting the money I was earning back into producing more stock. The publicity was based on word of mouth. Salwar, kameez, dupatta sets were a novelty, and women were happy to know that they could pick up nice ready-made suits. The fact that these were only available from my home made them more exclusive and sought after. My stock started growing, and so did my client base, as more and more women came to know about my venture. Over a couple of months, my stock grew into a few hundred suits. She started with like a dozen or so suits. It seemed to be a normal, natural progression. I returned the entire bank loan within 6 months and found myself to be free of the burden. Udhar or loan was a dirty word, and I certainly did not want it weighing me down. I've written this, oh yes, because she finally realized, and she's written, I did seem that I was in business. Now her SKDs, Salwar Kurti and Salwar Kameez Dupatta. I'm a man, so excuse me. Her SKDs, which was Salwar Kameez and Dupatta, which started to become a trend slowly, steadily, were actually initially called Mrs. Bindra's Punjabis in Mumbai. And people would ask around her flat, hey, to figure out where her flat was by, hey, where's Mrs. Bindra's Punjabis? And that's how the word started getting out. Now, the designs were basic but very colorful and practical. Elegant and smart were the words I heard from my customers to describe the suits. More and more women were hearing about my suits by word of mouth, and my client base kept increasing very fast. It was giving me a good exposure to the market and the buying power of women. Being a service wife, And having lived with a very tight budget till now, I was surprised to see that a lot of women were coming back every fortnight to pick up something new and were not shy of buying a couple of suits at one go. Many a times they would pick up suits even for a small occasion at home. The varied backgrounds of my customers made me realize that for many women, buying new clothes was a routine activity and didn't require too much planning. Whoa, there's an abundance of buying power that women have, and she was able to unlock this insight very early on. This is very interesting. She goes over her journey, she goes through and through to cater this very insight, which I find very fascinating. As my fame spread, women from all over the city started coming to my boutique. Now she's got a small room in her house as her boutique. After a period of time, the salwar suits were in demand from women of all backgrounds, working women, housewives, and even artists from the TV and film industry. I was really surprised to see some of the film stars coming all the way from Bandra to buy these simple cotton suits. Lots of big industrialist wives were coming, and they later ended up bringing their entire families to shop. Rupa Bajaj was a regular who used to come straight from Pune and stay back even after completing her shopping. We would chat over coffee and even went out for lunch together a couple of times. She brought in all other members of her large family. The Piramals were another large business family. I remember the Choksies with a lot of fondness, especially Manju Choksi, who was very friendly and forever smiling and brought in many other members of her family. Sharmila Tagore would come quietly with her 2 kids and buy a few suits. Deena Pathak, when her daughter Supriya and Ratna were regular customers for many years. There were a lot of TV artists and working women who loved to come and shop for these suits. These cotton suits were definitely on an upward journey. I was surprised to see the mixed clientele from all walks of life. For me, it was very heartening and flattering to see this response. She not only found a gap, she also realized there's a huge unserved market. Because the only option women had back then, especially women that were married and that were going out, had their own careers, was saris. And saris is not the best option to have across the entire trajectory. But salwar kameez and dupatta was much more comfortable, easy to put on, easy to move around with, easy to do a lot of work. So it actually filled a very important gap. I was not fuzzy about, here's a customer service thing that she did, which I think is very interesting. Whenever somebody would come back because of the sizing or fitting or the ink, maybe the print fading or some issue, she would always leave them better off. Hear this out. I was not fuzzy about taking back or exchanging suits even after 3 to 4 months, as I felt that if a customer did not like what she had picked, why not exchange or return her money? If a suit came back with any small defect, I was quick to replace it, always making sure to give an extra dupatta or a salwar to compensate for the customer's trouble of coming all the way. Smart, uncommon sense. I was not really doing it as a strategy, but just because it felt good. And it was a very good strategy whatsoever said. Never leave a customer with a sour taste. Always give them something extra. It's hardly has some cost to it, but they will keep coming back. And with women, the word spreads. I brought to the designs all the feedback that I constantly received. Again, try and test. Not trial and error, but trial and testing. And she kept improving them. Here's another observation she did of her customers. More adventurous women sometimes wore a sari on top of a salwar kameez while leaving home to escape the wrath of their mother-in-law, but would immediately take the sari off in the lift and stuff it into their bags. Women across the generations and across different income stratas were willingly accepting SKDs. Within 2 years, I saw the salwar kameez become a pan-India dress for women. Again, she's found a trend, just like Charlie Munger says, find a trend and ride it all the way till the end. She's found a trend and she's riding it, and she is pretty much at the top of the trend. Within 2 years, I saw the salwar kameez become a pan-India dress for women. Women were happily adapting to this new trend. They could now buy well-designed and trendy suits at a very affordable price and not worry about buying fabrics and finding a tailor. In my view, the reason for the rapid spread of my salwar kameez was the beautiful design made available at an affordable price, which is Biba's USP even today. That is the DNA of Biba. Interestingly, women who had been confined to the sari almost all their adult lives found the salwar kameez to be a liberating dress. It gave the wearer an energetic air and made her look younger and trendier. As it was a modest dress with a 2.5 meter dupatta, it was accepted over a period of time even by the most conservative families. Another important factor that contributed greatly to my early success was my sizing chart. She would size a lot of women by hand, and she realized an insight which other manufacturers, now there weren't many manufacturers of SKDs, but even other manufacturers, mass manufacturers, would take a standard size from international standard sizes and try to do it in India. But because she had measured so many women, she naturally had an understanding of an average body type. Another important factor that contributed greatly to my early success was my sizing chart. I used to take the measurements of most of my women clients, and this gave me a great insight into the general body shape and build of the Indian women. I discovered that Indian women were narrower at the shoulder and broader at the hips compared to Western women. Therefore, I did not follow any existing Western sizing charts, but made my own Indian one. I kept the hip measurement 2 inches looser than the chart demanded, and the shoulder half to 1 inch less than the Western chart. My size measurements fitted women very well, as the suits were a little loose on the hips, were comfortable, and had a nice fall. Women felt thrilled that they could fit in a size smaller than anticipated, and gave me credit for a well-cut suit. I also made all my clothes a size larger than the label. For example, like a 34 was like actually in fact a 35. For salwar kameez, my sizing became the benchmark for the industry, and many started copying it. Years later, some store manager actually remarked her saying, "Ma'am, aapke to dresses itne simple hai, but they just fly off the shelves." Little did that man realize that these would fit just brilliantly to women. It had so many insights packed into it that I really find it very interesting. This just made me go, right, whoa, this is a nice insight to have. Now, she's constantly on the grind now, cranking up new styles, experimenting, exploring with block printing, fabrics, and her experimental streak does not end. I'm telling you, it does not end. 4 decades in the career doesn't end. And in fashion industry is such. Here's another interesting insight that I've highlighted, where I was surprised her inspiration going forward. I experimented with lots of new styles by studying books on various costumes of India over that period. Some of them were very beautiful and graceful, but a little fuzzy. I had to turn them into more practical and wearable garment. I was fond of giving my designs names based on the place they originated from. Some of my styles that were inspired from many old books were Bhopali kurtas, which were widely worn by upper classes in Bhopal. It was a beautifully gathered kurta with borders stitched on the garment. I mostly use the 9-yard Maharashtrian saris, which I sourced from the Dadar market in Bombay. The saris were in bright and beautiful colors with woven borders. I used them for the dupattas, and the borders were cut and sewed on the garment, making it a graceful and colorful attire. Bhopalis remained a popular trend for years. Now, these Bhopalis kurtas were traditionally worn by men. Here's another bit that again surprised me. Another inspiration was designing kurtas from what the Peshwa men wore. Now she's designing for women. She never does for men, but Peshwa men wore. They had very loose sleeves gathered at the cuff. They had a few gathers in the front of the kurta, and I added pockets on the side to add a contemporary feel to them. These were mainly white kurtas teamed with some small floral printed salwars and plain colorful dupattas with little embellishments. The Peshwas, as I called them, remained a craze for many years. So she's constantly experimenting and studying from the eras gone by, bringing them and adding them a contemporary mix or a practical element to it, and they're just flying off the shelf. I love this approach because, and she later mentions in the book as well, the possibilities are endless with the history and the variety that Indian culture offers. Here's this highlight I've literally wrote as Ferrari mode, because Meena is literally on Ferrari mode right now. This for me was a period with a lot of experiments and innovation happening at my end, and the market was quick to respond very positively to all the new offerings. Whatever she was experimenting with were just flying off the shelf. Meena probably had the Midas's touch at this point, and you can just see that. I mean, I love reading this book. It is such a refreshing take on fashion, and I think you should read it as well after this episode, using the link in the show description. So I make 70 paise off your purchase without an additional cost to you. For inspiration, you have to just look around and take the help of any route that inspires. Many a times these may be things you'll have lived for with years like carpets and rugs, they weave together the artistic history of the country. Abstract to floral motifs depict the design sensibilities of the country. The legacy of opulence that the carpets provide is unbeatable, providing endless inspiration. Besides these, there are so many items that can inspire a good design like pottery, vintage picture frames, your grandmother's sari, or a hand-embroidered bed cover in the family. I mean, my highlight and my note is keep your eyes wide open. India is filled with inspiration at every corner. Another inspiration for her. To me, Indian temples are great sources of inspiration. The perfection of their architecture and design, the clever use of colors which have sustained for centuries, and the riot of vibrancy which the offering of flowers provides are unbeatable. I love the prose. There is so much beauty around us. I'm always so humbled by the simple aesthetics of our traditional things, like old furniture, utensils, locks, mirrors, etc. They are all full of artistic expressions. The shades age and wears away just like we do, she says about the indigo color. My all-time favorite book for inspiration was Costumes of India and Pakistan by S.N. Dhar. I used to study the old costumes worn by women down the ages from different parts of India. I was fascinated by the grace and beauty of these garments for daily wear. I had to make these garments a little fuss-free and more practical and contemporary while retaining the essential characteristics of the design. I found the whole process very creative and enjoyable, and making these garments gave me an all-time high. I think this pretty much summarizes how she is taking her venture forward, and it pretty much summarizes how you and I are studying founders of the bygone era and making our ventures move forward. This is exactly why I'm studying the greatest entrepreneurs in the history of India. You can have anything you want in life if you dress for it, is a quote that she lives by. It's by a costume designer, Edith Head. Well, you fake it, you make it. Dress for it. Here comes brand Biba, the name where it comes from and how she goes about it. I gave it some thought. I wanted to have a nice short name for my salwar suits and felt that it should have a Punjab connection. It should be short and easy to remember and pronounce. Besides the Punjab connection, I wanted the name to have contemporary feel. The name Biba came to mind. Biba is a term of endearment on one very widely used in Punjab for a young girl. It also means nice, sweet and decent and is used even for boys at times. However, it is pronounced as Biba, B-I-B-B-A in Punjab. As I was in a hurry and thought that this name in any case would only appear on the bill book, I didn't want to think too much about it and I settled for it. Thus, Biba it was. Well, it started as a bill book because now that she was supplying to a lot of stores in Bombay, they wanted to have the bill on some names, and that's how she came up at the spur of moment with Biba, and it has stuck through and through. Working with Benzer, another store in Bombay, or one of her earlier who carried Biba's SKDs. Another store in Bombay which carried Biba's SKDs very early on. Working with Benzer also gave me an insight into the Gujarati way of running a business. Most of the apparel shops in Bombay were run by Gujaratis, who were smart, focused, ambitious, and worked very hard to achieve their goals. They all prefer to get most of their staff from their native villages and train them, employ them, and provide them with food and accommodation, thereby ensuring loyalty. They told me that these people worked very hard as they wanted to make their parents feel proud in their community and were wary of any negative feedback going back to their native village. This way, they worked hard with discipline. The owners felt a moral obligation to help people from their native village. It was a good demonstration of corporate social responsibility when the term was not so well known. This is followed to date, and it just works. I still believe that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication and beauty in life. It shows elegance through restraint, and in a world where complexity and extravagance are the norm, simplicity stands out. You can never go wrong with it, be it in clothes, food, or lifestyle. My note is nice worldview to have. Simplicity is what was one of the cornerstones of Biba. Now, because she was starting to sell to a lot of stores in Bombay, she did not have a label on the kurta, on the salwar kameez, not just a size label and nothing else. But when she got into organized retail, the first organized retail shop insisted her to have a label, otherwise they would replace it with their own label. Hear this out. And this was Shopper Stop, yeah. Uh, Shopper Stop. They came with a size label only and not with the Biba label. That was the practice back in those days. Mr. Nagesh, the manager there, was surprised to see that our suits did not have a label of the brand. So he jokingly gave us a wild thread saying, if you guys don't put your label on your suits, then we will put our label on your suits. This threat, laced with his advice, galvanized me into action, and within a fortnight, all our suits had a Biba label. So Biba shifted from the obscure bill book to the garment for the first time, which was its rightful place. No, my note here is, what a good problem to have, no? A retailer telling you, blackmailing you to put your own brand on your work. Now, I told you her leadership skills really helped, and she became the first brand in India to have these ramp walks to showcase the newest set of clothes or the season clothes that were out. And she started roping in big names in Bombay to do these in the stores that were already stocking Biba. So this played a lot of things right for her. Got a lot of customers in, got big models to try their clothes on, got walk-ins into the store. That led to more sales, of course, but these were expensive initiatives to do. But this became one of the reasons why she became a pioneer in the industry. It just is crazy to even think of something like this and execute it at that early stage as a startup. We had some top models of the day like Bipasha Basu, Aditi Govitrikar participating in the fashion show, showcasing our garments to the top floor of Shopper's Stop. So these ramp shows at Shopper Stops were very expensive. She says, we spent much more than we could afford at that time, as our fashion shows had the top models of the day participating, and they were planned, executed, and choreographed well. We thought of all these efforts as building blocks for us and Shopper Stop. By the middle of 1990s, the SKD market matured and there were many more brands in the ethnic wear market. The challenge for us at the time was to increase our production capabilities, not selling. And this is where she hit a roadblock. Now, my highlight note here is business is a problem-solving machine. That is what a business is. Constantly solving problems as they keep arising. Hear this out. It was difficult to find large tailoring units. Exporters were not interested in manufacturing salwar kameez because they found it too fuzzy and it was not really an assembly line garment. The garment would go through 4 different processes before it was ready. Cutting for placement of block printing, hand embroideries, machine embroideries, and the final stitching. With these various processes done at different locations, coordination between the vendors was becoming very tough. Hard as it may seem today, in the 1990s, my problem was never selling but scaling up the production. I wasn't making the numbers I could sell. Whoa, that's a lot to say to a brand that's so early in. And these problems are still existent today in the market. Now, this was one of the problems that was slowing down her growth. The another reason that was slowing down her growth in the 1990s was that they were taking money out of the business consistently and buying properties in Bombay for their home, for their first office, for their first store. I mean, that kept, and in Bombay, the price is crazy. You know this. So it kept draining on the finances of the company. She has a nice quip here. I should have probably more relied on my friend Maria's prediction from the Moscow days, which was slowly coming true. I was weaving a safety net in the 1990s for myself, but here I am in 2024, still going to work 3 days a week. Again, she started Biba in her 40s, so she wanted to have her retirement sorted, and that is why she would constantly take money out of the business and put it in buildings and in office spaces so she could generate rental income. Little did she believe her friend in Moscow. So finally, I think the demand for formal wear was also increasing as now women were shifting from the sari to SKD even for formal wear. So the last bastion of formal wear, the sari, was conquered. She is constantly riding the SKD wave, and it was an amazing insight to get on this at the right time, at the right place, and do it in a way in which it just ticked so many boxes. It's amazing. Now, in the next leg of her journey, her 2 sons slowly and steadily enter the business, reluctantly for her because she did not want them to be part of the business, and they both take over Biba's journey forward. She's still active to date, but then you see the the equation between the sons and the mother and how it impacts the business. This is Siddharth, the younger son. I think a lot of his tenacity, persistence, leadership, and team building capacities originated on the sports field, as sports had been an integral part of his life and shaped his personality in more ways than one could imagine. My note is sport is a brilliant learning ground, and you should take up a sport, a team sport, not an individual sport, for leadership specifically. She goes much more in detail of Siddharth and his early life and his journey. Siddharth had a strong inclination towards cost cutting constantly, thereby bringing in more efficiency and profitability. One of the weaknesses of Meena was she wasn't as cost conscious as she wished, and that is why a lot of people took advantage of her, which she didn't realize through her journey until Siddharth came on the scene. And he's like anal about costs, and you'll see him riding efficiency throughout Biba in her entire journey. Even to date, he's still heading the company. His obsession with cost cutting is amazing. One of the first ones that I could probably share with you is, after observing, so for a few months, he just observed Meena work, and this is his first initiative. After observing her work for a few months, Siddharth wanted to make some changes in the way the company was functioning. He fired his first salvo by hiring a professional pattern maker, since he was not convinced of the average of fabric consumption per garment that I was issuing to the tailors for the suits to be stitched. He couldn't quite see what the average per suit were based on. He looked very skeptical when I informed him that I was giving the fabric based on what the vendors were asking for, and I was measuring the garments to arrive at my own calculation for the average. He proceeded with the pattern maker, who was given a brief to calculate the right average as efficiently as possible on the basis of the pattern. After a month, the pattern maker delivered the first set of new averages. She had slashed our averages by 20 to 25%. It was a big shock for me also. I was, of course, happy at this huge saving, but also a bit disturbed as to how and why I had been issuing so much extra fabric to the vendors for so many years. And this actually stopped the supply of Biba fabrics to the market. A lot of these vendors would take that extra fabric and sell it in the grey market in Lajpat Nagar. Reluctantly they were all, the vendors were of course not willing to accept these patterns and all of that. They fought through this and finally they relented. There's another thing that just made me go, in the highlights. Reluctantly, they were all back on the bandwagon, and with this one act, huge savings were brought into our production, bringing an end to the selling of Biba fabrics to some specific shops at the Lajpat Nagar market. Siddharth got down to cutting out unnecessary activities and expenses, and also streamlined our process and the way we were operating. My highlight is, gentlemen, watch your costs. You gotta watch your costs, and it's amazing how Siddharth did it. They were the first to initiate something called as shop-in-shop model, and this started with Shopper's Stop. I won't go into too much of detail, but they realized that they could respond faster to the market, be closer to the customer by having their own kiosk in Shopper's Stop with their own person manning it or leading it, because it would probably be a woman. And this is where Shopper's Stop was very reluctant, and finally they set up a high target of 72 lakh rupees of business per month to be generated, per month or per quarter or something like that, to be generated for them to justify it. Otherwise they had to foot in the losses. It was a big risk which Siddharth and Meena took together, and for the first 3 months, and this is where you realize how vendor relationships work. First 3 months they were not hitting the mark. I think I should read that out for you guys. The first 6 months, falling short of the MG, the minimum amount to hit every month was 8 to 10 lakh rupees, and the first 6 months they were not able to hit it, and Shopper's Stop had an agreement with them that if they don't meet it, they have to meet the deficit. But Shopper's Stop did not go through with that. They saw the growing number of sales in the kiosk, the shop-in-shop model, and they let them grow. Shopper's Stop was experienced enough to wave off the amount, seeing the upward trajectory in the last 3 months and not wanting to disrupt it. So we continued with the format. Had they deducted the 10 lakh rupees at that point, which was what they had to deduct, based on the minimum guarantee of the sales. We might have been forced to walk out of the arrangement. Later, we kept achieving much higher sales than the MG required till the point that it finally became irrelevant. This was a big inflection point for us. We were one of the first to try out the shop-in-shop model, which was later followed by all other department stores and other brands. The shop-in-shop model helped us in many ways. It brought us closer to the customer and we started getting to know our customers better. We were learning the intricacies and the demanding nature of retail. As wholesalers, we were not so mindful of the seasons and the importance of the right merchandise at the right time, things which we learned by handling our own counters. As retailers, we realized the importance of time. If our product did not reach the shelf in time for a certain occasion, the time was lost. Biba as a brand evolved from wholesale to retail. Our whole thought process was changing and we were becoming more consumer oriented. The whole business still continued because of a lot of traditional shops, sari shops and other establishments started stocking ethnic wear as part of their catalog. The interesting thing is, I think once they got into formal retail shops, their backend became organized, structured, and streamlined, and that helped them tremendously. Another brilliant initiative here was them partnering with movies. Would you think Bollywood has a distribution channel for your brand? Here's how it probably started. Another big new initiative taken by Biba was movie merchandising, where they actually partnered. They were also, of course, having their own counter at Pantaloons, which was run by Kishore Biani. And Kishore Biani plays a huge role in Biba, which we will discover in a bit. But this is one of the first ones that he started with. Sanjay went to meet Mr. Kishore Biani, the owner of Pantaloons. Mr. Biani had just finished producing a movie called Na Tum Jano Na Hum. This is 2002. It was a debut film of Isha Deol and the second of Hrithik Roshan. Sanjay entered Mr. Biani's room and found a suitcase full of clothes from the movie in the room. Pointing towards the suitcase, Kishore ji asked Sanjay, "Banaoge? Karoge?" There implied that he wanted to know whether Sanjay was interested in replicating these garments to sell them with the tagline from the sets of Na Tum Jano Na Hum as the movie's merchandise. Of course, Sanjay accepted. Sanjay is the elder son. Sanjay, of course, accepted the offer readily as he was always looking for new marketing ideas. Movie merchandise was not sold officially till then. Before that, everything from Bollywood had to be brought from the grey market, which was a completely unorganized market. The film producers those days didn't market their movies as it is done now. This was actually a very novel idea back in the day, and this continued on because they kept partnering with movies. Producers kept partnering with them because this was another revenue source for the producers, and this was on a brilliant distribution model for Biba to get into. They did it for a lot more movies. Maybe if it comes somewhere, I'll tell you. Hear this out. Once when we met Mr. Biani, we jokingly told him that we probably made more money from this design than he might have made from the movie itself. Because they sold, I think, some 800 SKD suits in this one specific design. I won't get into that, but it's amazing how some of the designs became classic cult figures at those times, and they were there for ages, like 8-10 years in the season. Just changing of the colors, sometimes just one color, they just kept flying off the shelf. I wish I had asked you guys for a royalty for this design. For years, we were so busy making it in white colors that it never occurred to us that this never occurred to us to try the design in other pastel colors. I still can't unravel why a particular design sells the way it does, and why certain others equally good-looking designs don't come anywhere near them. Probably like the title of the film, Na Tum Jano Na Hum. Again, made me laugh. It's amazing. She has this beautiful humor about her, very, very British, but very nice. They didn't always turn out into great profits, but we were happy to consider them as marketing expenses. This is after some more movies. She did with Devdas as well, which didn't quite work out for the company, for Biba. But then again, these didn't always turn into great profits, but we were always happy to consider them as marketing expenses. Now here's where my next highlight is about faster feedback loops. This is what she gets into now. Again, Ferrari mode. Hear this out. This direct retail improved our cash flow, as cash was always being collected daily by having the shop-in-the-shop model. Another great advantage was that customers were now directly interacting with us at our stores. This is where she starts having stores, Biba exclusive stores. Their likes and needs were better understood by us, making us better acquainted with their preferences. The experience of retailing led us to become more disciplined in planning our products and timelines. Much ahead of time. Yes, so here's where, surprisingly, Manmohan Singh enters into this book. And I realized that Manmohan Singh our former Prime Minister, and Meena's husband, Satish Bindra, were classmates in college, and their friendships endured throughout the years. And now that Meena had moved to Delhi, in this point of the story, moved her offices and worked to Delhi with Siddharth, and Sanjay, her first son, or elder son, was handling the offices and the work in Bombay. Now that they were in Delhi, Manmohan Singh ji was the finance minister at this point of time. They got along really well. It didn't take us long to get well settled in Delhi and go back to socializing with friends and family. We were meeting Manmohan ji and Gursharan frequently, mostly for a cup of tea in the evenings. Satish and Manmohan ji had in some ways a similar nature in integrity when it came to handling money. In 1999, Manmohan ji asked Satish to help him with his Lok Sabha election campaign, which he was fighting for from Delhi on a Congress ticket. Satish became an important member of his team and was kept extremely busy for a couple of months dealing with the intricacies of a political campaign, which was a totally new experience for him. After the fanfare and noise of the election settled, the money collected from voluntary donors that had not been spent was counted, and a list of names was drawn up to return it to the respective donors. Hear this out. Like room te khade ho rahe. My husband told me that he was deputed to go to the well-known journalist Khushwant Singh's house to return the 1 lakh rupees donated by him, as the money had not been spent. A very surprised and embarrassed Khushwant Singh took the money back and said, "I have never seen something like this in politics. To get back the money that one had donated was definitely a rarity." When I heard the story, I was amused but not very surprised, as this was typical of Manmohan ji and his meticulous nature, proud of our past and former leaders. It's amazing. When they were expanding their stores, they're expanding their back-end and manufacturing abilities, they secured an investment from Pantaloons. Of course, it had a little bit of rough edges, which Kishore Biani amazingly ironed through, and finally Pantaloons invested in Biba, Future Ventures, which was the sort of the VC arm of Kishore Biani's Future Retail Enterprise, invested 12 crores in Biba. Siddharth had negotiated a structure of fully convertible debentures with them. The first 5 crores were converted at a valuation of 72 crores in 2007. Remember, this business was started with 8,000 rupees loan. And the next 7 crores were converted into equity at a valuation of 100 crores. With this funding in, they continued scaling the operations of Biba with multiple stores and multiple more initiatives. It was always a winning streak in a fashion business to be very quick and agile in taking out new trends in an extremely short period. Because they were so streamlined and organized and structured, especially in their backend, they were just able to fast forward the ability to take from design to shelf, like in really short amount of times. The clothes were truly exquisite and beautiful and filled up a huge gap in the market. Sometimes by creating a good product, a brand can create a demand for it. Interesting highlight. If a good product is easily accessible, then the demand for it also increases, as consumers then can create many more occasions to use it. So after the investment and a few years later, and the scale of Biba growing, both the brothers wanted to have their own separate ways. Sanjay and Siddharth, they both wanted to go their own ways. And this is where Mr. Biani came in and said, "Listen, I'll acquire the entire company as a way to settle between both of you brothers," which didn't go well with the family. But then over a few weeks later, Sanjay out of the blue called Mr. Biani wanting to sell. And it's amazing how Mr. Biani was able to handle both these brothers and give a great exit to both of them in their own ways, and get a brilliant profit at the end of it as well for himself. Now this is the meeting before the final negotiations was being done. Hear this out. It just shows the long-term vision of Kishore Biani and the ability to look at potential from the outside that those who are building the business cannot see. So Siddharth, the younger son, told Mr. Biani this, right? He told Mr. Biani that he should not go over a value of 130 crores for the company under any circumstances, since he felt that Sanjay, the elder brother, was anyway happy to exit at a valuation of 100 crores a few months ago. And since Siddharth was buying 50% of Sanjay's shares, he didn't want the price to increase. Siddharth wanted at least 1 year's time to be able to pay Sanjay the full value of his shares, as he didn't have the money readily available to purchase the same. This was the brief that Mr. Biani got, but here what happens when Sanjay enters the room during the final negotiations. On the day of finalizing the deal, We both flew down to Mumbai and three of us went to Mr. Biani's office. Both Sanjay and Siddharth were ready to accept Mr. Biani's settlement, as they felt that he would be impartial and would do what was good for the business. Siddharth went in alone and briefed him about his concerns regarding the valuation, which I just read to you. And here's what happens when Sanjay enters, okay? Now, Mr. Biani agreed to everything that Sanjay had asked for. Hear this out. Here's what Sanjay asked for. Sanjay came out of his room in 20 minutes with a broad smile. Apparently, Sanjay had asked for a 200 crore valuation, to which Mr. Biani agreed. He had asked for the freedom to start the same business from day one of his exit. Normally, in such cases, you have a non-competing clause and all of that, but Mr. Biani agreed. Mr. Biani had agreed to that too. Sanjay wanted the entire sum within 6 months, and this had also been agreed upon. He was taken by surprise as he hadn't expected such a smooth and short meeting. And when he walked out with a smile and Siddharth went back in, here's how Siddharth was handled as well. And here's what Kishore Biani responded to him. Do not worry, let him go out a happy man. Don't worry about a few crores from more here and there. Now you will have a free hand to run the business, and with faster decision making and a single point of control, the business will bounce back on track. You will be able to easily make up for this extra money you're paying. Oh my God, he created a complete win-win-win situation. Of course, it was extremely hard for Siddharth to manage to get the money in 6 months of time. He was stretched thin and he bounced back on his own in 6 months to just make it in the nick of time to pay out and buy out Sanjay's shares. I just want to quickly jump to the exit that Kishore Biani and Siddharth got a few years later, and just shows if just Sanjay had held on to his shares, how much worth it would be. And so this is where the Biba is getting sold at somewhere in 2013, and hear this out. The deal was closed at Biba being valued at 1,000 crores in September 2013. Sanjay had exited Biba at a valuation of 200 crores in 2011. Mr. Biani made a manifold profit on his initial investment and got 5 times return on Sanjay's shares, which he had purchased just 2 years back. It shows to go that if you can hold on a little further, you get such crazy returns. But I'll leave it there. It's an amazing story, A Stitch in Time. I would highly recommend you to go buy the book from the link in the description and give it a read. Can't get better than that. On that note, go and make some Galata. Thank you.